Hello, and welcome to another edition of Where Do We Go From Here? I'm your host, Jermaine Bro.
And we are delighted this evening to have with us Dr. Pearson Cross from the university. He is now the Associate Dean of Liberal Arts and also longtime Associate Professor of Political Science.
That's correct.
And quite the sought-after authority on what in the world is going on in Louisiana. So we have been fortunate enough to entice him through these wonderful homemade cookies that Miss Margaret has made for us. That's the only reward, I'm sorry, to talk about the impasse in the Louisiana legislature. So we are...
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Cross?
Sure. I'm a California native. I grew up in California, went to Boston, got a PhD at Brandeis, and then I came down to Louisiana to start teaching. I taught a little bit around Boston, and I came down here, and I've been here for about 20 years now, teaching at ULM for a while, now at UL Lafayette, and shortly after I got here, I became department head and was in administration. Now I moved to the College of Liberal Arts, where I am kind of special projects person for the dean, the number 2 person there. So it's great. I like what I do. I enjoy being at UL Lafayette. I enjoy the southern Louisiana region.
Great, great. We're happy to have you. So we want to discuss, like my co-host, Ms. Barbara said, the budget. What's going on with the budget? Why are we at an impasse right now with the budget?
It's an odd kind of impasse right now, isn't it? Because they're in general session, so they can't really do anything about the budget. So right now the budget is balanced only through a number of spending cuts. And those spending cuts haven't taken place, but they will unless the legislature provides some funding.
Right.
And excuse me, whether they do that or not is it's still up in the air.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seems like we come to this place every year or every so many years where we're at an impasse. Is that just a communication tool, the impasse, to help us communicate better?
Help us communicate. That's a positive.
Is that the way you would see it, Dr. Cross?
Well, yeah, there's a certain amount of brinksmanship here, of course. One of the background to everything that's going on is that John Bel Edwards is a Democrat. The House and Senate are led by Republicans. And those Republicans in the House and Senate are very determined that John Bel Edwards not have a big win. And so they don't want him to get reelected. They would much rather reelect a Republican. And so we play this kind of chicken game with the budget, you know. So John Bel Edwards lays out the budget and everybody says, oh, you know, that's terrible. It'll never happen because either there's taxes in it or they're too big a cuts. And then they say, we're not going to do that. And then they brinksmanship all the way up to the budget deadline. Now, 2 years ago, when they did that, there were cuts, you know, at the end of the day. A year ago, as I recall, my area was not cut. There were some cuts that were passed around. But this year is all in the context of that 1 cent sales tax rolling off, which is going to cost the state over $1 billion in revenue.
Wow.
So there's a real cliff, is what they call it, that we're approaching, that unless we do something, there are going to have to be some big spending cuts.
And that's why we call it a cliff.
That's why we call it a cliff.
Because we're going to fall off a cliff because we're losing a 1 cent sale tax.
That's right.
That was making a big difference in our budget.
Yeah, making $1 billion worth of a difference. So the budget in Louisiana is about $30 billion. Of that, it's not as good as it sounds. Of that, about 2/3, actually 71% of that budget is federal money. So that means that 29% of that is really state money or money that's in the general fund that the government can spend. And of that, 2/3 is constitutionally dedicated to K through 12 education or tied up with debt and interest and other kinds of things. So there's about $3.4 billion that is truly in play. And we're facing right now, $770 million deficit. So unless the legislature raises some money or unless they make some really serious cuts, like eliminating TOPS or something like that, I think we're in bad shape.
And we've come to this impasse because a lot of people don't want to see those kinds of cuts happen because, like you mentioned, something like TOPS, that most of our students same place where you are
Yeah.
at the university, would lose
Exactly.
that funding for their education, which is so
They
important.
would.
I want a little policy clarification,
Okay,
if I
sure.
may, yes. As I recall, some people say.
Nothing clear about policy, by the way.
No.
As I recall, there's a distinction between property taxes and sales taxes as to who pays the most or what demographics
Right.
pay the most. Now, I understand that we're one of the lowest for property taxes.
That's correct.
And we're one of the highest for sales tax?
We are the highest
Yes.
for sales tax
We are the
in the
highest.
United States.
And what group tends to pay the most of the sales tax? How does that fall?
Well, it depends how you look at it. Obviously, sales tax affects everybody equally. The question is, not everyone is equal in personal wealth. So people who don't like the sales tax say, a poor man goes to the store and buys something and pays sales tax on it. It costs him or her more proportionally of their income than it would cost someone who is rich. Rich people who like sales tax generally, or people in the upper echelons, say, are you kidding? It's the same. You walk in, you paid $6 in sales tax, I paid $6 in sales tax. That's, what could be fairer than that?
Yes,
Right.
yes. And then-
Because there's just a lack of vision into a different person's income level and how it would impact their income, their resources, their living expenses. All of those things have to come into play because you have to understand how it affects everyone across the board.
Yes, and property taxes, I think, are harder to pass.
Property taxes are harder to pass because people, first of all, the people you're going to pay them are the people who have more clout. Generally speaking, those are the homeowners,
Yes.
or the property owners, or commercial property owners. And we have a bunch of things built into the Constitution that limit the ability of property taxes, like the homestead exemption, which limits the first $75,000 on your primary residence. So, as a result, we've had problems passing millage changes in property tax. There's a lot of money there, but it's very hard to get it. Homeowners are unlikely, oftentimes unlikely, particularly in hard times, like in Acadiana the last couple of years. They're particularly unlikely to tax themselves, no matter what the issue is.
Well, I just wanted to get that out there, and so, you have any hopes for, or ideas for taxes other people can pay?
Well, that's what Edwin Edwards said, right? He said, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the man behind that tree. Meaning, let's tax people, let's find a way to get tax dollars without hurting ourselves, right?
Yes.
Right.
And we've been playing that game for a long time, but, the pigeon has come home to roost, so to
Right.
speak, at this point.
Yeah.
So what are some important cuts that could happen if we don't?
Well, right now, according to John Bell Edwards, he's going to completely eliminate TOPS, and I think that's about a $290 million cut. We're spending about $290 million on TOPS. I think he said he was going to eliminate 220 or 230 million of that. Obviously, that would be devastating for those families who are counting on TOPS, but that's a huge pot of money that the legislature can get a hold of, So that would be one of the ways. Higher education in his budget was in for about a $25 million cut. He was going to cut health care, which also has its own issues. Maybe we'll get into it. About $185 million and so on. Because remember, we're trying to get up to that $775 million total. So what do you cut from, right?
Yes.
So all of these things are not things that we would like to see as a society, not in healthcare. We don't want to see cuts. We don't want to see cuts in education, of course, because those things are very important to us.
Yeah.
So what do we do as a public? How can we adjust to these changes and these sales taxes and all of these impasses? And how can we, as just regular old Americans, just make it through these different kinds of changes that we see with cuts?
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind with cuts is what kind of a society do we want? Do we want a society where we have good roads, where we have clean water, where we have good schools, where we take care of people who need it, particularly in terms of health care but mental health care.
Right.
We've talked a lot about that. So if that's the kind of society you want to have, then you're going to have to pay for it. And it's not cheap. And we've been doing a lot of that on the cheap, which is why in certain areas, like in the roads, we have a $13 billion backlog of This is just a backlog of maintenance
That
and
needs to
bridges
be
and
done.
those kinds of things. That's without building a new road or a new bridge, right?
Right.
So we've been letting things go. We've been letting our pension funds go. We've been letting a lot of things go. We've been kicking the can down the road, as the expression goes. But if you're at home and you're thinking, what can I do? Well, you need to get educated, get informed, and then you need to get involved. If your legislators are not, you know, supporting the kind of life that you would like to have in Louisiana, you need to think about voting for somebody else.
Right. And people need to understand that when they vote, that's power, and knowledge is power. So if you have the knowledge and you make the right vote, you know, you do your vote, then that's a lot of power. And you should address your legislators, the people that you have elected into office. You should be able to talk to them.
Absolutely. And they are our friends and neighbors, you
Yes.
know, but they just got to be held to account. You know, what
Right.
happens is they mostly talk to people who are well-connected, who have
Right.
money, or they talk to lobbyists or so on, and they get over in Baton Rouge, and are you over in Baton Rouge every day? I'm not over there every day. So who do they talk to? Well, they talk to legislator, they talk to lobbyist A from this corporation or that special interest, and at the end of the day, they protect those people, and they don't look out for us so much.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
And are you, I wonder if you're willing to talk about this. I have heard some people say that term limits have not necessarily been our friend because so many of the, particularly in the House, that they are new to this, and as a result, sometimes they are led around by lobbyists who are making more money than they are and have been in the business a lot longer than they have.
Yeah. One of the arguments against term limits, and I'm not a fan of term limits at all, so I should say that. One of the arguments against term limits is that they give power to people who are there longer, which would be lobbyists, committee staff, governors, people that have been in office a long time. Because legislators have a learning curve,
Right.
they don't go over to Baton Rouge ready to really
Right.
be a potent force. It takes 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes 2 terms to get up to speed.
Yes.
And then because they're part-time, they're not doing it every day, and then they get pretty good and then they get washed out or something, you
Right,
know?
right.
So I'm against it in the big scheme. Here, it's been interesting with term limits. Term limits has speeded the Republican takeover of the House and Senate by pushing people out who had
Right.
strong connections. It's changed the tenor of debate, and you notice that, like if you look at the Senate and you compare who's been there a long time, and a lot of those people in the Senate are in their last term, they've served a number of terms in the House. Those people are pragmatists. They're ready to make a deal. They're saying, what's good for the state? The Senate is where some real deliberation is taking place. Who do we have in the House? Bomb throwers, people who say no, you know, people who aren't interested in coming to an agreement at the end of the day. They're just interested in making a point or appealing to the worst instincts of their constituents. And frankly, it's not very good for Louisiana.
So we have, you know, people on both sides. We have people who like term limits and people who don't, but we still have our government that we have to, you know, abide by the rules and regulations. So what's going to happen with this impasse? Like, what would happen to health care?
Well, healthcare in particular, if those $185 million in cuts that the governor suggested he would have to make unless the legislature raised something, is actually going to be magnified by, because many healthcare dollars are in fact, there are 2 main problems with that. One is that there are the private-public partnerships across the state that would be imperiled. And the other thing is that healthcare dollars draw down federal dollars, oftentimes at a pretty steep, so you spend a state dollar and you get 3 federal dollars in return. So I think it would cost us, those $185 million would cost us $1.4 billion in federal money. So we would really be taking a big hit there. Then there's also the public-private partnerships. Right now, for example, in Acadiana, Lafayette General has a partnership deal to run the med center. And they've said if those cuts go through, they're pulling that out, and they would be yanking primary service for many Acadiana people. We would take a real hit in terms of coverage of health care. We'd see more people in emergency rooms. we would see some real problems.
I think I read, what was it? Is it 600 jobs and 55,000 people go through there every year?
Isn't that amazing?
And that's
Yeah.
a primary medical.
Yeah,
I
university
mean,
medicine.
everybody knows somebody who's been to UHC.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's
Yes,
true.
university hospitals and clinics, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and this was part of Bobby Jindal's move to move away from a charity hospital system and to get public-private partnerships. And regardless of how you feel about that, lots of people like that, some people don't. But now that you've done it, you've got to fund it.
Right.
If you don't fund it, it won't work, you know.
Right.
So I don't think Bobby Jindal envisioned just not providing health care for people. You know, I think he thought or was trying to put the best spin on it to try to get a better health care for people at a lower price. You know.
But to do that, the state has to continue funding something.
State needs to live up to its obligations, and particularly with these private partnerships, we made deals with these private
Right.
Yes.
private hospitals, and if we, you know, back out of these deals, we're sending a terrible message. Louisiana's already getting downgraded in terms of its bonds. We're already being described as the worst state in the United States, second year in a row. I mean, our legislature is not distinguishing themselves, and this budget crisis that they continually are tilting at is not helping our standing.
Yes.
Right, right. It's very scary also.
Oh, yeah.
To the average person, it's very, very scary.
It is, and I'm glad you brought up our credit rating, because I noticed an article a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times that is Louisiana a failed state? And I thought, well, even if the people in Louisiana aren't reading this article, the people on Wall Street are.
Yeah.
This doesn't-
Standard & Poor's are looking at this, right? Yeah.
Yes. Well, okay, that's healthcare. How about education?
You know, education is one of those things, higher ed, okay, because when it comes, now there are a few things, let's talk K through 12. I just saw the other day that they're talking right now about, you know, keeping that frozen, regardless of what happens, K through 12 funding. You know, when you freeze K through 12 funding, you give education a cut, because you get rises in pension and health care and other kinds of uncontrollables. So every time you don't fund an increase of 2 to 3%, you are actually cutting that amount, because it takes that much more every year just to stay at the same level.
2 to 3%.
2 to 3% every
stay
year,
even.
to stay where you are. So to really give people a raise or to make something better, you need to be up around the 4 or 5% in order to make it better.
Make a difference, yeah.
Wow.
And if you think about it, if we've done level funding, I think it's 8 of the last 10 years in K through 12 education. That means that essentially we have, you know, 15 to 20% fewer dollars now covering the same number of children across the state.
Yes.
And we have a slightly rising number of children,
Yes.
over 700,000.
But the funding has remained level.
Funding has remained level, which in the big scheme of things means there's less money.
Yeah.
Well, no, I noticed that we're rated pretty low.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 50th. By some measures, we were rated 51 in terms of educational achievement. And our our LEAP scores just came in, and we took a big hit there, you know, so we now have dropped precipitously
Oh, really?
in LEAP scores. John White has said that that is the result of switching over to computer testing, so we'll see next year if that's in fact the case. I certainly hope that's the case. But, you know, with the legislature in 2012 did a number of things that pushed experienced teachers out of the field. You know, there was the changes to tenure. Made it much harder to get tenure, changed requirements, the focus on testing,
Yes.
all these kinds of things, the emphasis on charter schools and all this. So teachers are leaving the field. Right now there's a dearth of teachers. You know, they don't know where they're going to get them.
Wow. I did not know that those kinds of changes existed within education.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Where their tenure had been questioned and had been changed and everything you thought you were following, because there's a track to tenure.
Right.
So you just don't happen upon
Right,
tenure.
right.
You have to follow a track.
Now you
in
have
order
to have
do it.
a superior rating 5 out of 6 years in order to get or keep tenure. And that's very unusual. Only about 12% of teachers get that rating.
Oh,
So
I
imagine
see.
so everybody's without tenure now.
Yes.
So everybody's thinking, you know, the job's tough.
Right.
You're belittled in the press all the time. Everybody talks about all those lazy teachers and those big extravagant salaries they make. By the way, their pay's fallen below the Southern regional average. Back when Kathleen Blanco was governor in 2007, Louisiana teachers reached the Southern regional average for pay.
Wow.
Since then, they've fallen way off. So now we're paying our teachers less than they're getting in other states. You can go to Texas right now and get a $15,000, $20,000 raise.
And I see that's what's happening a lot.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
big migration towards educators to Texas.
Yeah, that's right. In Texas, you know, go look at a public school in Texas and go look at one here. It's night and day. You know, Texas values education.
Right, right. It's all in what you value, what's important.
Wow. Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of a positive angle. Is there anything else that we need to know about? I mean, I guess we're just going to give up on the roads, right? And all those D and F rated bridges.
Yeah, and the environment, you know, there's not much happening on the environment. There was some good news last year in criminal justice. You know, and there may be some good news this year. It's too early to tell, but there's been Louisianans for Prison Alternatives and some other groups are making quite a push in the area of criminal justice. We lead not only the state, the United States, we lead the world in incarceration rate. We have I mean, this is way above China or Russia, you know, those repressive regimes. Right here, we lead them. We have more people per capita in prison. But we don't want to do that forever, right? So
And that means we're paying for it, right?
we are paying for it, yeah.
Because it is a business.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's a business.
Is it cheaper to keep someone in prison or in school? Just tell me.
Oh, it's cheaper to keep them in school, big time. I mean, they say that for every dollar you put in, you know, from the child's age from 0 to 5, rebounds back to you about 10 to 1. It's an amazing turnaround. So if we could you figure it takes about $30,000 a year to keep somebody at Angola. If you could take $15,000 and invest it very carefully in a high-risk child, right, to make sure they don't get to Angola, you'll be saving yourself a lot of money. But that would require, you know, planning
Right.
and insightful
Thought.
thinking and investing
Right.
in children's futures, you know.
If we believe education is important,
That's right.
that's what we
Well,
have
we're
to believe.
capable of planning, yes. We
Yes,
can do
but
that.
thoughtful planning, are we capable of thoughtful planning?
Thoughtful planning,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Okay, yeah, do you have some ideas of what we might pull out of the hat that could be, do you have some,
What would we like to see?
yes,
What would we like to see in the regular session? What do you think we would?
What would
What
we
would be
like
best
to
to-
see? What would
best
be
thing?
like to see? Well, I'd like to see them continuing with this criminal justice reform, you
Yes,
know, and
That's important.
certainly, you know, they're moving in a number of areas, you know, but again, it's just a question of what can get passed, you know. I mean, the Senate, right now it's not the Senate. The Senate can do a number of things. You know, there was the Senate just passed, the committee just passed a repeal of the death penalty. You know, whether that'll make it into the House.
Right.
People don't know. People have a kind of a feel-good thing about the death penalty. They killed somebody, they deserve to die. Well,
Right.
we're one of the states where you can kill somebody for raping them, for rape. You know, it turns out that trying to implement the death penalty is so expensive that most states, there are 31 states that have the death penalty now, but many states are just giving up on it and saying, look, life and parole is terrible, but, you know, it's much more manageable, right? And what we also find is that the death penalty is given more to African Americans than it is
Right.
to
It's just
whites.
proportionately.
Yeah,
It's just
the rates vary state to
Yes.
state, but sometimes 4 times as high, you
Right,
know?
right.
So you say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right, you know?
Right.
When we see whites who commit murder, we always talk about, oh, well, you know, they were upset about their job loss or there was these extenuating circumstances, but we don't go through those steps when it's an African American who's committed a
Right.
murder. We're acting on impulses and, you know, they should be punished.
Right,
You know?
exactly.
so we could save money on the death penalty. Hadn't
Yes.
thought of it in
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, we could save money there.
It's a shame that we had to be mandated to do this criminal justice reform.
Oh, yeah.
But at least we're getting some positives out of it.
Very
And that
definitely.
disparity that has existed so long within the criminal justice system will finally have some thoughtful, perspective on it. Because if you're not aware of what's going on, there is no way that you can do something
Oh,
like this and change
absolutely.
it. And we are having shows in addition to yours and others.
Okay.
We are having a show on criminal justice reform,
Oh,
ICE
good.
detention centers. We're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
some population health,
Well,
different
yes,
kinds of things,
healthcare,
and
yes.
healthcare in general. So we thank you for joining us. We just want to know, to answer that question, that age-old question, where do we go from here? Thank you, Dr. Cross.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.